Hi, and welcome to another episode of NewsReal with Joe and Neil.
I'm Joe.
I'm Neil, and today is Sunday, December 16th. We're going to be discussing this week the revolutionary climate in Western Europe at the moment, specifically the Yellow Vest movement in France, and of course, Brexit has flared up. Well, it's always there, isn't it, in the UK. We'll also be discussing, if we have time, we'll see some of the other international developments in the last week, which do kind of directly tie into the social situation going on in Western Europe. Of course, we've got the climate change conference going on in Poland. It's over now. It went on all last week anyway. And a couple of other tidbits. But the first thing to say is that at this point, what do you call it? Is it like a revolution?
In terms of a legitimate revolution, probably what's happening in France and in other countries around Europe is as close as we're going to get, at this point anyway, it's as close as we're going to get to a revolution. There was word of Macron having a helicopter at the ready.
Right.
There, I think just yesterday, Saturday, he in case they actually managed to get to the Elysee and, I don't know, chop his head off or something. But yeah, that shows. But I suppose that's prudent, for him to do that, and it indicates the seriousness of the situation, I suppose, and his understanding, or the French government's understanding of the level of anger towards him.
Yeah,
he's certainly not the kind of person or kind of president that the French authorities think could get out there and appease the masses. They understand. It seems that there's a strong sentiment of wanting him gone.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's no chance that he's going to go, because that's what democracy is all about, right? The will of the people. I mean, the figures given were 84% of the French population support these Yellow Vest protests, which a primary demand of theirs is for Macron démission, Macron out, basically fired, resigned. So 84% of the population, by their own statistics, want him gone. But under the rules of democracy, you can't change your mind. If you supposedly voted for him 18 months ago, then it doesn't matter what he does through his 5-year term. You're not allowed to express the popular will. Or certainly you're allowed to express a popular will, but that will not be acted on. Cause democracy, # not democracy.
Yeah. If I could if I summarize what this is like a popular appeal for democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously the last thing that the people who've been using that language ever want to hear a large crowd, much less a clear majority of the population calling for.
Mm-hmm.
This is basically an SOS for freedom and democracy. Actual freedom and democracy,
yeah.
Because they're saying we don't have it. We don't have a voice in France, never mind in Europe.
Look, there's no such thing as democracy, right? This is what people don't understand. That there's no such thing as democracy as, modern, what are they called, kind of developed democracies? Is that what it's called? Or maybe that's the term. Anyway, modern democracy. What people think it is, it's not what they think it is or what it's touted as. But then the idea of democracy in those terms was stupid and never made sense throughout human history. There should never, and generally never was any significant period of time when, or really never was any period of time when the will of the people was actually done. How do you canvass 65 million people and find out what they all actually want and then have someone implement? That's not the way it works. The way democracy works is, and the way governments and states have been run for forever, basically, is that a group of people are elected or put forward to lead the country and make the big decisions. And the people, to some extent, may have a say, but not really. The point is that we decided that you, group of people, will be the leaders and you make the decisions. You don't come asking us. We decided already by voting for you to make those decisions. So you make the decisions. What are you asking me for? I voted for you to make them. But on the so that's what it is. And that's not democracy as commonly understood, as in the elected representatives actually do the will of the people all the time. They check with them and ask them what am I doing the right thing? Is this the right thing to do? You know, I mean, it's not representative democracy really. It's at a specific point in time, a group of people are elected or chosen to be the leaders to make all the decisions and entrusted with the responsibility of making good decisions. When they stop making good decisions, then the people should have the right to elect other people at any time. Not for a 5-year term or a 4-year term or an 8-year term, whatever, but at any time when they stop fulfilling their function, the role for which they were chosen, which is to run the country properly. And it's not hard for politicians to understand what running the country properly means from the point of view of the masses of people in the country. It's, you know, no punitive taxes, make sure people have enough food and employment and resources to, you know, roof over their head, enough money to buy food, etc., and decent enough infrastructure. It's all fairly simple, you know. It's quite simple to figure out what generally will keep people happy in a country. So they know this, and when they stop doing it, they're obviously doing it willfully. They're doing it knowingly. They know that they're doing the wrong thing. They know that they're doing things that are going to piss the people off and the people will want to get rid of them. But of course, they do it by deception. They bullshit the people. They tell people that actually what they're doing is not what they're doing. They're doing something different, and they try to confuse them with all sorts of narratives about how the economy works and how you can't have this, and I'm sorry, there is no money, and money doesn't grow on trees, and then they give a load of money to some of their friends or something like that. So, yeah, it's not really, at this point, it's more or less a dictatorship of the elite, of a group of elites. It's not a dictatorship in the sense of one person. And dictatorships never really are just one person. You know, there's a figurehead, but there's a group of people always around dictators. So it's just really at this point in Europe, there's not much difference between dictatorship and what we have in European so-called democracies. You have the dictatorship of an elite who really don't care and aren't interested in what the people want, and are enacting laws that are punitive for the majority of the people, majority of the people in the country.
Yeah.
And the people have no recourse to do anything about it, except get in the streets and complain and throw stones at police, and some of them wreck the place a little bit and set fires and stay. That's all they can do at this point. What they've been doing is all people can do, you know. Talking about the French media, there's a picture that I just want to use to sum up what the French media does. Or it sums up the French media and what their role is in general, and specifically in relation to these protests. It's a picture taken by someone of the Yellow Vest protests, and in the background there's a guy with a placard saying, at the top of the placard it says Macron, and underneath it says Dégage, which is the same as démission, i.e. resign. And then there's a video which you can check online of France 3, the third national French TV station, and they have that same image, but they have removed the word dégage, edited it out.
Right, as if the protesters holding up a sign that simply says Macron.
Right.
Okay.
So according to the French media, everything is the opposite of the way it actually is.
Yeah.
For anybody to expect that someone like Macron, who's a Rothschild banker basically, and is a globalist in the literal sense of that word, he's not interested in French national interests. He's interested in globalist interests, i.e. the interests of multinationals, global banks, that kind of thing. And that's where he came from. That's who he used to work for. So for anybody to think that someone like him with that background, and who claimed that he wanted to rule as a Roman god over France, and when he won the election, would then suddenly sit in front of the camera and strike this kind of humble, I am your best friend pose genuinely, is just, you're deluded, like, you know. I mean, it's not hard. You just have to assume that people lie an awful lot, and they do, like particularly politicians and people like Macron. They'll say whatever they need to say to have their way, you know. And that's a good example of it. I mean, when someone radically changes character, it's probably not real, you know. Would have been more honest of him to come out and just say, "You filthy French peasant scum, how dare you challenge my godlike rule? I will smite you all with my police forces." That would have been more, okay. That's Macron, yeah.
Which is effectively the real message, because that is what has happened.
Mm.
The police presence has been unprecedented. People have noticed that the numbers have gone down. I mean, officially there were about 66,000 people out protesting in cities all over France. That's the total for this past weekend, so-called Act 5, the fifth weekend. They're probably lower estimates. They will, of course, want to play down the numbers. Nevertheless, there are far fewer people. You can see that if you compare the videos with earlier weeks. And that speaks to the success of the real message, which is sent via the police activities. When, especially on the weekend of the 8th, Saturday 8th, that was phenomenal, where they had police forces, a riot forces, the gendarmerie, and then they had these other guys, roving gangs of them, who would work through the riot shields and to come out and part crowds. They were coming out. They made sweeping mass arrests. They arrested about 2,000 people, just grabbed whoever. Mm-hmm. Officially, the media reported that as well. No, they were likely to be casseurs, rioters, vandals. That was not true at all. They were just grabbing whoever they could. It was to terrorize the others, beating them, shooting at eye level. They're not supposed to. They're flashbangs. They're rubber bullets. People were losing eyes, losing hands. There are a lot of serious injuries. And not just in Paris, that's in Bordeaux as well, Toulouse, all over the place. So clearly a national order, the real message that went out was beat these people back into submission, frighten them and we'll reduce their numbers. And that is, there's an arithmetic to it. There's a logical, that is what we have seen in the subsequent two weekends. The numbers do go way down when you beat the shit out of people. Mm-hmm. That's not going to make it go away, of course, because they would have to make serious concessions to not have this erupt again soon. And the next time, of course, people remember what was done to us last time. You know, people do have memories when they're being beaten. You know, we say they have short-term memories when the media is lying to them, but they remember this.
It's pushing the whole thing closer to over totalitarianism. You know, because in dictatorships and over totalitarian regimes or systems, the people were, you know, if they protested, were frequently beaten and cowed in that way. And what happened was that, yes, it stops people from getting out in the streets and, you know, challenging the authorities, but it produces a seething resentment under the surface and a complete dissociation, let's say, from any previous I suppose any partial previous
good deeds,
well, positive intentions or whatever that people might have had towards the government. It really disenfranchises the people radically, and then the country just becomes ultimately unmanageable. You know, when you effectively have a population that is, you know, is in a revolutionary spirit, but is not revolting simply out of self-preservation. But they're certainly well aware that the government under which they live is illegitimate, you know, and that kind of thing that kind of system ultimately fails. You know, ultimately those people become ultimately ungovernable. You know, so it's crazy to think that for any government to think that they can keep people down in that way forever, because obviously the European governments and the French governments would assume that they can keep this going in perpetuity, you know. But they've crossed a line, really, with these protests, and there's no way back unless they make radical changes, and there's no way they're going to make radical changes in the government or government policy. So, and in fact, they're going to continue on, and then when they commit their next egregious act of, you know, some kind of punitive measures against the population, the people will either get in the streets again and have their heads beaten, or they'll just become more resentful, you know, and it'll come out in other ways, you know. Eventually you have just you can end up having mass non-cooperation with the government. You know, one of the things that haven't happened as part of these yellow vest protests is any semblance of strike action. People actually not going to work, you know, or blockading major industries, etc., you know, and that's still something that they could do, you know. that used to happen more often under the syndicates, under the trade unions. Specific sectors of the workforce would all leave en masse together. The yellow vest is a bit more disorganized, so you don't have that level of organization as you have with the unions. But it may reach a point where, if the word goes out, then you wouldn't just have teachers striking or real workers striking. You'd have people across the full spectrum of all industries in the country striking. Maybe not all of them, but a good section of them, and that would be much worse than just one section.
Yeah. People are commenting on French social media that these protests have won more concessions for people than 30 years of action by those trade unions. I mean, that's interesting, even though and that's saying that in the context of, it's still pittance. So, okay, They got the fuel tax increase repealed. They got a small increase in, is it minimum wage or the minimum social benefits for unemployed?
It's like it's kind of like the minimum wage, but it's an extra payment by the government that doesn't require employers to contribute to the equal amount that an employer has to contribute under the French socialist system. So it's basically coming straight from the government, if you know what I mean. They don't receive anything from employers, that gave a little bit, but that, again, the problem with those concessions were that was promised already. Earlier this year, they promised to increase it by €60, and then it was scheduled for next year to increase it by another 40 to 100. So he basically just brought forward the extra 40, and so basically give what was already planned
for next year's budget.
For next year's budget, it just came forward, and the same really goes with the increase in pensions for people earning less than €2,000 a year in pensions.
He also put out a call to large companies in France, so employers of large numbers of people, to give workers a Christmas bonus, which they have agreed to do. Total, Orange. Someone did the figures on that, and it's 30 to 40 million. Boom, just dropped like that, which tells you, it gives you an idea of what the kind of coffers these companies have, and it still won't make a dent, or much of one, in their end of year revenue.
Yeah. But it also doesn't.
So they're buying them off, and that might also be having some success in winding
it's more
down
about
the numbers.
The vast majority of people aren't. Yeah, it's more about the reason it's causing a wind down in numbers is because people feel that there's some concessions were given. We forced him to give in a little bit, almost to admit that he was wrong, even if the concessions aren't really that impressive and don't really do much to alleviate the vast majority of people's financial situation. A lot of people would have thought that it's just, well, we got him to admit that he was wrong.
Yes,
because that's often what people want.
The satisfaction from being heard,
right,
and being recognised,
yeah,
and who could not see it? When they made such a show of it. They won in that respect.
Yeah,
they have won already.
But it's easy for someone just to say, "I'm sorry." #not sorry. I think, and this is the problem. Yeah, it might appease people for a little while, but then this government is on the same globalist track. Globalism basically being perhaps defined by the siphoning off of increasing amounts of taxpayers' money into globalist projects, for big corporations, tax cuts for the rich, basically, where the rich effectively get taxpayers' money. And for the other aspect, obviously, is the day Macron came back, last Monday came back from Marrakesh from the UN Migration Pact. A lot of money under globalist auspices goes to migrants, to people, not just newly arrived migrants in the country, but to encourage, to facilitate, and that takes a lot of money to put in an infrastructure to actually encourage migration, because when they talk about encouraging migration in this UN Pact, it's not just about waiting until they arrive at the French border and then put them up basically and cater for them financially, but actually setting up structures in other countries. The French government using taxpayers' money to set up structures in other countries to facilitate the movement of migrants. That costs a lot of money as well. So yeah, it's bizarre, that these people are doing this. And of course the rationale is that it's economics, we need more migrants because we're doing so well in European countries, in the first world, let's say, as it's called. We're doing so well that people are living longer. So you have an increasing number of older people in the population who need to, be paid, be financially supported by the state. And if you have an increasing number of older people, people are living longer, basically, because of modern medicine, supposedly. Then you need more people working in the country to provide the taxes that pay their pensions and their healthcare and all that kind of stuff. So that's why you need migration. So in the past, say, 10 years, the number of retired people increased by 2 million over that 10-year period from 10 years ago. And so what you need is but the workforce didn't increase by the same number. So the majority of the population increase is a result of people living longer, effectively. So you need to bring in foreign workers to support them. But the problem with that is the kind of people that they're talking about bringing in migration are people who aren't necessarily going to immediately contribute to the state, to the country, through their taxes, through getting jobs, because a lot of people are coming from countries where they don't speak the French language, they don't speak whatever language they're coming to, whatever country they're coming to, they don't speak the language of that country, they're not integrated, and very often they become a burden on the state. So a burden, rather than helping the people of the state by contributing in the form of taxes, they actually take away from the indigenous people in that country by being a burden on the state, by needing unemployment benefit, healthcare, etc., etc. So it doesn't seem to make any sense, and that's why we think there may be something else behind it. As we mentioned last week, there might be some other plan behind it or whatever, but we don't know. But it's definitely feckless, and it's definitely something that's not supported by the vast majority of people, or at least, let's say, a significant majority of people in most European countries, and I think in the world, essentially, because there's a Pew Research poll or survey, whatever, done of 27 countries that was conducted in spring of this year. And overall, it works out that, the countries there's about 10 or 12 from Europe, about 6 or 7 from Asia, the Middle East, Russia, then South America, the US, Canada, and a few African countries. South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, by large majorities, wanted no more migration to their countries. Which is strange, but obviously that's the same migration that we're talking about. They picked 3 of the wealthiest African countries, only 3, South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, and those people don't want, by majorities of 60, 65, 60, and 50%, wanted fewer migrants or none, and that's because people come from other African countries into those countries, and so people in those 3 countries are feeling the same way as Europeans and people in other countries who are relatively close to Africa, because it's the people from poorer African countries who are moving to those few richer African countries and into Europe. But overall, the majority, it seems the majority, something like 2/3 of that, assuming all of those countries can make up are representative of the globe, about 66% of the people in the world want fewer or no more migration into their countries.
Yeah.
So that means that about 2/3 of the world's population is racist, according to the dominant narrative these days. Right. That if you don't like migration, you're racist.
Right, and that's
so at least from the majority.
That's the argument they present.
At least the majority is the majority.
There's no explanation of, in Europe's case, well, you see, the population is getting older. We don't have enough people to pay for them in their old age. So we need more people. It's been expressed a few times in passing, but it's obviously not the dominant messaging that's going out there. The dominant message going out there is you're racist, period. So don't just shut up and accept it. And then, so France is seething last week. Macron gives his TV address to the nation, and within 24 hours, there's an ISIS terrorist attack. Now, what are the odds?
Sharp and take a breath. Terror attack.
What are the odds? Now, you might say, if it had been last year or the year before, well, there have been so many, it's just another one. But actually this year, there have been so few. And this is by far the largest mass casualty event. There have been all these stabbings and crazy people driving cars, which may be an Ali Akbar in how it's framed subsequently, or the guy actually may have been a deranged fundamentalist Muslim. But
there weren't many car attacks this year, though.
No, there weren't, but there was one in Melbourne.
Overall, 2018 was very quiet.
Quiet overall, yeah, in all spheres. But I'm thinking specifically of a shocking event which we got in Strasbourg last Tuesday. Just as the French media is telling people, oh, okay, so you've got your concessions now from Macron. Oh, by the way, here's a poll. 54% of the population wants the yellow vest to pack up and go home. So, and the police are putting out messages like, listen, we're really tired. Can you stop protesting? You know, we really put a big messaging effort out there as part of the package of Macron's speech to, you know, let's cool it down there, people. It's Christmas. Come on, wrap it up. And then, boom, there's a terrorist attack by ISIS, in quotes. There's a lot to say about this, but the first thing that hit me was, well, obviously people are going to go, well, that's a bit coincidental, isn't it? Such that a government minister has since said something to the effect that, well, no, hang on. Actually, what he was doing was he was renouncing a claim by ISIS on some website somewhere that we done it, or our brother did it for us. And they actually had the guy say, a close insider in the investigation said, I did this in Strasbourg for our dead brothers in Syria. So the messaging was out there that, oh yeah, it's ISIS. But the government minister actually went and said, no, there's no evidence that this was ISIS. This was just a crazy guy consumed by evil. And I was thinking of that because I'm thinking, is he thinking to say that because they don't want to talk this up too much as being ISIS, because otherwise ISIS, the sworn enemy of France for what it's doing in Syria and elsewhere, because ISIS just came to the rescue of it, which contravenes the 2014 declaration by ISIS, repeated everywhere ad nauseum at the time, that ISIS was specifically going after France, which it then did with Charlie Hebdo and the Bataclan terrorist attacks in Paris that killed hundreds.
80s.
Because France is a Western secular democracy and that one has to fall, blah, blah, blah. They gave the reason, and specifically their mission, they said, was to destabilize the French state. And here they come in and do something that effectively helps stabilize the French state. This is totally opposite to their professed goals.
Well, ISIS have been on hand for the French government and Western powers in Syria for the past 7 years to deal with problems. You know, like Bashar al-Assad. You know, you had several years of Western powers saying Assad must go, and then ISIS comes along and says, "We'll do it for you," and then they try to do it, and they don't achieve that objective because of mainly because of Russian intervention. But the other thing is that minister didn't wanted to put the kibosh on any ideas that this was ISIS is because it's anti-immigration. It would fuel anti-immigration sentiment among the French people. That this guy, not just well, first of all, the guy is of Algerian, I think, extraction, although he was born in Strasbourg. But he's of Algerian parentage, so roughly he could be put in the by some people anyway in the category of an immigrant within recent years, you know, or recent decades. So it obviously would inflame or embolden the anti-immigration camp to say that this was that, you know, to make the connection between ISIS radical terrorism and people of North African extraction in France. And I have people who maybe were born here, but also many people who are coming here, coming to France still from that area. So, because the government, obviously Macron's government, Macron just came back from a UN migration pact that wants to bring people
in Morocco,
like this guy from in Morocco and Algeria, bring people like him to France. So they don't really want to hype the idea that that they don't want to make the connection between immigration and jihadi terrorism. But the fact of the matter is that obviously someone else does want to do that, or did want to do that, to make that connection, because all of the evidence suggests this was a staged provocation. And so when they include the idea that he said Allahu Akbar and that he was an ISIS sympathizer, he was one of their brethren, there's someone who wants to inflame that situation in France. Someone working at cross purposes with the French government and with the overt policies of the French government of promoting migration. There's someone who wants to demonize migration and in that way encourage or embolden right-wing sentiment and anti-immigration sentiment in France. And that's the people who are behind this clearly staged terror attack in Strasbourg.
But at the same time, it's an effort that has suddenly made the entire political class overnight, at least as far as the narrative in the French media for the whole week go, it suddenly made them relevant again. They're all standing up there in the Assemblée Nationale, singing the Marseillaise, announcing we are again relevant, you need us to protect you, we're going to get the guy. They spend 48 hours looking for him. He turns up exactly where they first went looking for him before the terrorist attack happened.
Well,
the cross purposes, it seems to me that it helps the French state more than anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, possibly, but from the point of view of the people, where do you draw the distinction between two people losing their eye and one person losing their hand because of French national police violence and 3 people being killed because of a jihadi? You know, are we going to look to the police force that just blew the hand of one of our French nationals and caused 2 more to lose eyes? Are we going to look to them for protection against jihadis? Really? I mean, I don't know. It's not so clear to me that the French people would, after these protests and what they've seen and the way the French people have been treated by the French police, that they would look to the state to protect them. I don't think there's many French people who think that that's a reasonable position to take at this point. You know, I think more and more, let's say more and more French people anyway, are becoming disabused of that idea that the state is out to protect them. I mean, obviously there's physical protection, but there's also emotional and general well-being protection, and that's what they're protesting against in terms of the French government. You know, they're protesting against the French government because they are hurting a large number of people in a very direct way by depriving them of a sufficient amount of resources to live respectably. It's not very protective, is it?
No,
I mean?
No, yeah. But surely that's the image that they want to put out.
Yeah, but it's not working.
It's not working, though, and that's what makes it all the more like tense at the moment. They've basically shown their hand. That we've been using terrorism to corral you.
Yeah,
and to keep you down and scared.
Well, someone's doing that. They're capitalising on it. Obviously, the members of the French government, most of the members of the French government don't know about the true source or the true cause of that terror attack in Strasbourg,
right? And
they're capitalising on those events, on those people being shot, to try and say we're here to protect you and stuff. You know, the police have done a great job, blah 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 blah, and trying to encourage a bit of patriotism or allegiance to the state in that way. But the people who carried out the terror attack have a very different agenda. They're not interested in, I don't think at this point, they're not primarily interested in encouraging that kind of allegiance to the state. They're, like I said, they're more interested in dividing society, dividing French society down ridiculous ideological lines of left versus right. So they're the ones on all the terror attacks of these people. Many of the previous terror attacks that were carried out that had suspicious conditions around them that suggested that there was some powerful element of state apparatus, if covert, involved in these terror attacks. This has been going on for several years, and their goal all along, right back to 9/11, if you want to go back that far, has been to encourage the idea in Western societies that Muslims or immigrants, etc., are terrorists.
Yeah.
I mean, the original 9/11 attacks launched a war on kind of strike-through line Muslim terrorism. They call it war on terrorism, but implicitly was the word Muslim in there. Yeah. And it turned a lot of people of a particular character type against and reasonably so, against Muslims in general, and certainly against immigrants. I mean, it's crazy, that they would think that after those 17 years since 9/11 and all the terror attacks, all of them blamed on, vast majority of them blamed on radical Muslims, would not create the situation where a large percentage of the population would not like Muslims anymore, or would have a negative image of Muslims. Of course, that's going to be the result. And if you assume that they're staged in the way we've documented them effectively being staged, then you assume that that's the goal. That's your end result. What happens? These people aren't stupid. If there's a direct result of that kind of direct mass, wide popular result of these kind of terror attacks, then you have to assume, crediting these people who carry them out as being intelligent, that that's the goal they wanted to achieve, which is encourage a negative impression among as many people as possible of Muslims / immigrants / basically brown-skinned people, if you want to get very crass about it.
This speaks to the real reason for ISIS to declare a particular interest in France several years ago, which then we saw in Hebdo in Paris. Right. The real specific interest is because France has the largest Muslim extraction from Muslim countries, or just outright actual practicing Muslims as well in all of Western Europe.
Yeah, but
in all of Europe,
upwards of kind of
period.
20%, 25%, 15 million people out of 65.
And of course,
and then they're increasing the number of those types of people, of foreigners, essentially, of North African, Middle Eastern people in other European countries as well. The government's bizarre. This tag team they've got going on, although I'm not sure they know what's going on, but one side knows what's going on, but the overt government that's encouraging immigration, I'm not sure they really know what's going on. And I mean, they're doing it, like we mentioned, supposedly for economic reasons, for population replacement, worker replacement, etc. But for them to continue doing that when they see these terror attacks happening is just bizarre. Even if they don't know that they're staged terror attacks, you would put a stop, at least, a suspension on large influx of migrants under those conditions, would you not? I mean, just for social stability, you'd say, it's not freaking rocket science. It's 2 + 2 = 4. It's like, look,
that was specifically listed by a number of the manifestos that were being printed and shared around by the Gilets Jaunes. One of them was, it didn't get into it too much, but they call for a moratorium on mass migration, because of the current civilizational struggle that's going on. They didn't elaborate on that, but they're clearly referring to the war on terror, the effects of waves of migrants coming from the Middle East because of the wars, which they also, of course, spoke out against as well. That was the extent of it. So it wasn't, anything like the kind of depiction of a far-right group saying, we don't like blacks, Muslims, browns, period, don't let them in. But it was a very simple, pragmatic, like you said, acknowledgement, well, given the current situation, can we please put a freaking pause on this at least? Yeah. But no, Macron didn't even care what they were saying, of course. He went ahead. He had his agenda, and his agenda was taking him to Marrakesh last week, arguably at the peak of the public uprising in France.
Yeah, and it's interesting that he said nothing about the protests. He made no public statement about them for 4 weeks.
He said one, but obliquely. It was in the context of something else.
Yeah, just a vague statement, but he didn't actually do his official address about this issue and what he was going to do about it until the day after he signed the UN Pact on Migration, which suggests that he wanted to get that done and dusted, and the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and France's signature on it before he came to the people to give them concessions, because he's afraid that if beforehand he might be forced into conceding that he would not sign the Immigration Pact, which suggests that he definitely wanted to sign that Immigration Pact. And it's a big, as we mentioned, it's a big thing in France.
It's a battle between two directives or sets, if they're discreetly formed, of elites, such that right there, when Macron was doing something that would have hopefully, they thought, the French or / European globalists, one side of them, elites, were trying to calm the situation down. Boom, at that moment, there's a competing directive to say, no, throw fuel on the fire by having a Muslim do a terror attack right now. Is that two competing directives? Is that what you're suggesting? Because for me, I see a key place where the two interests meet.
Yeah, well, both their interests meet in...
The population, 80% of them, is uniting against the elite in France.
Right.
And here you need to have something that, well, how can we split that into 40-40? How can we split that group again?
Right.
Well, then you have a terror attack. And in that respect,
you want to split the population.
They both benefit.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Although one of the ones who carry out the attack are a bit more in the know and have more power and control and are working on quite a nefarious agenda. They're a really dirty, they've got a dirty scheme going, you know. But yeah, definitely it's their goal or the result of those kind of terror attacks is to encourage or inflame anti-migrant sentiment among the so-called right, and then supposedly force the left to, instead of focusing on the French people's common cause of government corruption, to feel that they have to stand against the right. So you create a problem. You embolden the right. You inflame the right by having a terror attack, which obviously, after every terror attack, the right wing nationalists say, "Okay, this is ridiculous. No more." And then the kind of more bleeding hearty lefties say, "Hang on a minute, you right wingers, shut the hell up. We like migrants and stuff." So you get them fighting amongst each other rather than fighting the state. But I'm not sure people are that dupable in that respect, and I think ultimately their left-right political sentiments take second place to how much money they get at the end of the month and how much food they can buy and whether they can make their rent payment. That's the bottom line. And so you can't make that go away by saying, shouldn't you people be fighting each other? Don't you disagree on migration? Yeah, we might do, but you know what? I can't eat political ideology, so I'm going to prioritize you screwing us on our taxes.
Yeah, they've said that in so many words. To hell with your republic, I need to eat.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the modern equivalent of let them eat cake,
Yeah.
When journalists or government ministers or whoever pontificate on, but the republic and democracy, and if you don't like it, come and vote differently. Yeah, but you don't understand, mister. I can't eat, so...
Yeah.
It's...
But speaking of... do we want to talk about the terror attack itself, or was that already done? The details of it?
What is it to say? People know. People know in France. I mean, the media... Here's an extent to how much people know. Within hours, that evening, they were having to put out stories attacking complotistes, which is the French basically for conspiracy theorists, who were suggesting that the timing was bloody fortuitous for the French government or the state, let's say, if not Macron himself. Yeah, so people know, and no one's buying it. You can see that in social media anyway. The mainstream media, a government minister has since gone on. I mean, what do they say about if the moment a government officially denies something, it's actually the case? Well, they've already officially denied having any involvement in it, which is probably partly true, because that government minister would have no clue that there would be, arms of the state that are being used for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, that's the problem. A lot of government functionaries are just clueless. They don't know what's going on, basically.
So he can plausibly say, listen, this is ridiculous. You're all nuts, or Russia's pushing conspiracy theories or something like that.
Russia did it. No, to sum up the Strasbourg shooting, someone walked into the Christmas market in Strasbourg and shot 3 people dead and seriously wounded 5 more, and wounded another 9, and shot at soldiers who are on patrol, because these Christmas markets are heavily patrolled and have a heavy police presence. He shot one soldier in the hand, and then he escaped in a taxi.
And specifically Strasbourg, it's got an old city that's surrounded by water. The river splits around it.
So he walked across.
The market's held in there, and each checkpoint, they have checkpoints where anyone coming in, and there's millions of visitors to this one. It's like world famous. It goes back 500 years. Anyone coming into this event, it's barricaded, and you have your bags checked.
Right.
Plus, in addition, there's been all these terror attacks in France the last couple of years,
Right.
plus one specifically at Christmas markets in Germany. It
Right.
wasn't just last year. So they've got armed soldiers.
Right.
So those soldiers were already there.
Right.
And into that walks somebody.
Somebody walks in, like I said, shoots dead 3 people, seriously wounds 5 more, wounds another 9, shoots a soldier in the hand during a shootout with the soldiers, then leaves that area back across the river, goes back to an area just, maybe a few kilometres away. There, about an hour later, there's another shootout with police or soldiers. He escapes from that and then is missing for 36 hours. Can't be found, despite the fact that 700 police, security services, rescue team, hostage rescue teams, all that kind of stuff, special ops teams, 700 of them, closed motorways, closed the border to Germany, and they couldn't find him for 36 hours. And then he's walking. He's the person they claim was the shooter, was walking down the street near his apartment, and the police apparently knew who he was. They said from at night, from behind, in an area that's has a high population of immigrants, so it'd be very difficult. Can you imagine, walking down the street at night with a lot of immigrants in a part of a city, and you're maybe 30, 40, 10, 15 meters behind someone, and from the back you're able to identify them as someone specific, and you call out their name, they turn around and you shoot them dead. And that's the guy who did it.
Turned around,
No,
he's firing.
He's shooting at them, and then they shoot him dead.
Hits a police car, and then that gives them just cause to, boom, summarily execute him.
And then he's dead. So the only thing you can get from that is that some guy was shot on the street. The guy they claim did it was shot on the street near where he lives. The claim that he was involved in the rest that happened previously, the Christmas market and the shootout afterwards and stuff. There's no evidence that he was a guy at all. And it would be obviously very easy to walk down the street and just shoot someone, right? And even claim that he shot at us and then we shot him. You could just shoot someone who you've decided is the guy who you want to take the fall for it, But the most interesting thing is that this guy that they shot, supposedly the only gun that they found in his apartment was a 1892 pistol that was standard issue in the First World War for the French military. It's a strange gun. It's basically a Wild West kind of like six shooter. Yeah. It's got a circular cylinder chamber for 6 bullets, and they're not even 9mm; they're 8mm bullets, and so you have to manually load like cowboys and Indians type thing. And it's not very accurate. The bullet caliber isn't very high, and this is the gun that he committed this mass murder
and
with,
successfully got out of 2 gunfights with patrols, plural, of heavily armed Operation Sentinel French soldiers. Yeah, so it's not at all credible. It speaks to probably the haphazardness of a rush job of framing this guy.
Absolutely.
In addition to this, of course, we also know that they raided his apartment before the attack, allegedly over a separate a case in which he was wanted for
robbery, homicide attempt. He didn't know, and he just happened to be away that day because he was planning. Supposedly, he was going to be at the Christmas market that night, shooting people.
The coincidences pile up.
But this guy was on the fiches, which is the terrorist suspect list of the French government. I think there's something like 4,000 people on it.
I don't know. Much bigger figure, 26,000.
No, yeah, a lot more. But there's only about 4,000 being actively kept tabs on. This guy was being reasonably watched, apparently, according to the French Ministry of the Interior. He was being reasonably watched. He was basically a kind of mafia jihadi. Well, he wasn't a jihadi type. He was just a kind of mafia.
Petty criminal.
Petty,
really.
Well, not petty, but a bit more serious crimes, but just a criminal basically. So the problem with this is that he's on the terrorist list. So he's got a kind of handler. Or he's been in contact with people. People have watched him, and he's probably has some kind of contact, which is often the case with some of these individuals where they have a handler, let's say, in the French intelligence agencies. So they're able to, manipulate them as they wish. But the difference between this one and previous terror attacks, which were had a much higher death count or body count, and were much like the Bataclan or Charlie Hebdo and stuff. The difference with this one, with a smaller death toll, and it being wrapped up in a short period of time and made to go away in the media very quickly and stuff, is probably because there was, like you said, a rush job where they had to cobble it together quite quickly compared to previous ones, which they could plan for months and months in advance, down to the last detail. This one had to be thrown together quickly as a response to the Gilets Jaunes, as a way to do what we said it was designed to do, which was to try and distract attention, for one part anyway, distract attention from the Gilets Jaunes, the Yellow Vest protests.
And split their unity.
And split their unity, yeah. So, but it had to be thrown together quite quickly in a short period of time, because remember, at this point, the Yellow Vest protests had only been going for 4 weeks. So they couldn't have planned it any more than 4 weeks previous, right. And in fact, it probably wasn't even that. It was as they saw it growing and intensifying. Yeah. They maybe had a couple of weeks. So it's quite not a long time to put together a very detailed false flag kind of shooting like that. So that's why it was. None of them make any sense. All of them have anomalies, even the well-organised ones. But this one, the fact that they couldn't even give him a proper gun that would make sense as to how he shot all those people, suggests that they just didn't have time to get all that together. They threw it together quite quickly, picked their patsy. They did the black ops kind of people who do these terror attacks. They are the ones who did the shooting, and then they just killed him at the moment they decided was appropriate in the street, and said, "There's your man," and put his name out. You have to remember that they just put a name out. People could go and someone with that amount of power could just go and start killing people anywhere, right? And as long as they're sure they can get away, and they probably are because they're organising it and planning it well in advance, when they do the shooting, they can simply give a name, any name, appropriate name to the media, and that becomes the person who did it. Yeah, simply on giving one name. That person could be already dead for all it matters, to them. Just give the name and that's it. And then as long as you kill that person or produce that body, there you go. Yeah.
I mean, within hours of the breaking news, they had no idea where this person was, but they knew who it was. Mugshot, criminal history. It was easy once it was a criminal, because you would have a ton of paperwork on him, right, and an actual mugshot, not just a dodgy-looking head, but it's a dodgy-looking head from a mugshot because he's got such a long criminal record. Right.
Take it from
the file. Then he can't do anything. And it's nuts. Like, they're saying that a place where he lived is so close to where it happened. Mm-hmm. They'd already raided the place before the attack, so surely it's being watched to see if he comes back. And then he's back there, and it's a chance occurrence on the street. Yeah. Anyway, no one believes it, but here's the problem with it. Just yesterday, in a Christmas market across the border in southern Germany, somebody threw a firecracker. Mm-hmm. And into a stampede. Into a
mall, shopping mall.
Shopping mall, okay.
And the stampede. 7 people were injured, yeah.
Now, you see, we might say, no one believes it, but these things have effects. You terrorize the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you terrorize them not so much with the threat of they might be coming to my home any moment now, but with the threat, I think it's the threat of becoming aware and really viscerally rocking that this is what the state.
Yeah. Well, at that moment, in those moments when people react like that to a car speeding down the road, or a sound of what appears to be a sound of gunfire, you're reacting instinctively, you're not thinking about any of that. But anybody who does think, and anybody who's a thinking person, if they have time to think in that situation, they would, and they hear gunshots at a Christmas market any time over this Christmas season, anybody who has any sense about them will think to themselves, if they have time to think, they'll think to themselves, oh shit, I better get out of here. The government's trying to kill us again.
Right. And they're serious. And they'll get away with it. There won't be any justice. So I better get my head under something. Okay. Or run. Okay, so that's France. We move on to Brexit.
Yes, Brexit. The shit show continues.
I know it's...
Speaking of deep state, go ahead.
They're two ostensibly unrelated things, right? This thing in France just erupted spontaneously, right, 5 weeks ago. And Brexit's been dragging on for years. But what is going on where you have severe, not yet severe, let's say, but a really, really serious fundamental political crisis on these two countries, either side of the channel? and not just there, of course. It's pretty widespread in Western Europe in some form or another. It's not a coincidence, I think.
No, it's
that there's
factlessness and corruption of politicians. Like, you know, just an increasing level of corruption and arrogance and you know, blatant disregard for any sense of you know, righteousness or integrity. Basically, they're just at this point I don't know. There's something driving them. Some kind of fear or some kind of they expect that, you know, something's going to go wrong or the people are going to rise up or we're going to lose our positions. They're just concerned about their positions of power and their influence, you know. And for some reason they've just, you know, they're afraid, and it's pushing them to ever more blatant acts of like I said, of corruption and idiocy. Basically, I mean, talking of the deep state and, you know, kind of secret government or behind, you know, a power behind the overt government in many countries. Tony Blair came out the other day and made a speech about how the Brits need another referendum. You know, now when you hear someone like Tony Blair saying that, you know that that's where it's at, basically, and that's where the real power kind of sits, because Tony Blair is kind of like a kind of a deep state kind of guy, you know, behind the scenes pulling strings and stuff. When he says they need another referendum, you know that's where it's going to go. But then, as we've been saying repeatedly on the show, Brexit was never going to happen from the beginning. It could not happen, and they all understood it from the very beginning that it could not happen from an economic point of view. And they've spent the past 2 years trying to undo that referendum that they foolishly allowed to go ahead, believing that they could rig it, I suppose, in some way that the result would not be a vote to leave the EU. But they didn't rig it properly or sufficiently, and the vote was 53% to leave the EU. The official vote was 53%. And since then, they've been trying their best to make it go away, because it can't happen. But they want to maintain the pretense of democracy and listening to the will of the people, etc. And the reason they had the Brexit referendum in the first place, it was David Cameron, the Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister at the time, who agreed to have the referendum, because it was back in 2016, wasn't it?
15.
2000.
Oh no, the event wasn't.
The event was 2000. Yeah, but he announced it in 2015, and then the vote happened in 2016. But he announced that because even by 2015, there was the right wingers in the UK had already kind of become quite strong under the UK Independence Party, further right than the Conservatives, than David Cameron's party, and they were concerned that they would lose power to the more nationalistic right wing, because the Conservatives in the UK were never really nationalistic. They're globalists as well, always have been. They're part of the kind of globalist structure in the West that emanates from the West. So they were worried about real grassroots nationalism taking over or taking a significant part of their voters, effectively their supporters that were traditional Conservatives, and so they stole that one issue from the new right wing, the new nationalists in the UK. That issue of let us have a vote on whether or not to leave the EU, thinking that they could manage it so that it wouldn't,
and put it to bed.
Put it to bed. That would be the end of it.
Yeah.
But they slipped up, and they've been trying to undo it ever since. And I'd say what's going to happen now, despite all the bullshit going on with May going back and forth to Europe, blah blah blah, all the details. I mean, they're all largely irrelevant, because what's probably going to happen within the next year is there's going to be another referendum. And despite the fact that maybe a majority of people will vote again to say that they want to leave the EU, it's possible. They'll make sure this time that they rig the vote in such a way that a good majority of people says, no, we want to stay in the EU. And then at that point, that'll be put to bed. And you look back, and the last 2.5 or 3 years of Brexit will just look like look exactly like what it has been, which is a complete load of factless nonsense.
Last week, May was going to put the deal she had made with Brussels to vote in Parliament.
Just going to get it.
And there was a whole series of developments where at the last minute she didn't. There was uproar. And then she survives a no confidence motion from the Tory party. That struck me as being basically a referendum within the Tory establishment, as saying it was basically their internal referendum on May, the Brexit deal, and generally staying in Europe. For me, that was it. Once they had put it to a vote, among themselves, they were saying, we're never going to have a Brexit. It's not going to happen. Yeah. Even taking into account Jacob Rees-Mogg and all the ones who were saying, no, it's definitely going to happen. They had their vote and that's it. It's settled now. So the only thing left to see at this point is, just how
well,
they make that okay with.
They need to keep May
popular.
for a sacrifice. They need to keep May as a sacrifice when they have another referendum, because that'll be, she'll have to go if she announces that another referendum. It'll be a betrayal of the Brexiteers and all that kind of stuff, and she'll have to go and she'll be the sacrifice, and she'll offer herself up willingly as a sacrifice, because there's no point in having no point in the Conservative Party changing leadership right now just to have that person then have to go through the referendum business and have to resign or something. So it's better May's got herself in this pickle, so she can go the full distance and stay on until they they stage manage or create the conditions for another referendum, and then and in announcing that, she'll say there'll be howls and all that kind of stuff, and howls of betrayal, blah blah blah, but she'll do the honourable thing and fall on her sword, and then the way will be open for the Conservatives to elect a new leader and carry on as usual, supposedly.
And the media in the meantime is going insane with
all over
Project Fear. The Times story we looked at yesterday, Brexit, suicide warning if exit turns chaotic.
Yeah, there'll be a mass spike in suicide.
Ministers are being told to prepare for a rise in suicide in the event of a chaotic no-deal Brexit.
And the other one was...
Sky News, will there be civil war if Brexit isn't delivered? But I think that's actually a more pertinent issue beyond trying to scaremonger people. They can scaremonger them with how horrible things will be if you don't go along with staying in the European Union. But there is a real risk they're running here of a yellow vest style backlash, certainly in England, against this. And we've seen it already. The first yellow vest protests began just 2 days ago when they blocked 3 of the bridges in London. The worst that's going to cause so far is a traffic jam, but a pretty bad one this time of the year. But there's the seed. That's what they have to contend with, and that's what they have the sharp eye on, keeping that from developing into the scale it did in France. But you think people are saying, I mean, I've heard many Brits themselves say, oh, I'd love to see us, really speak up for ourselves like they do in France. But we're all a bunch of chickens, cowards when it comes to this. But I mean, well, if you're really pro-Brexit, well, you're getting an idea now of the scale of what it would take to actually see the popular will done.
Yeah.
And even then, you might be disappointed. It might, and so that's why, in the end, this Sky News suggestion, which is obviously meant to scare people, may in fact be speaking to. They may be suggesting, yes, well, here's what you would need to do if you ever want a Brexit. You'd have to have a civil war.
Yeah, and that's another way that they're dividing the population. It seems to be that across the board, the elites are focusing heavily on dividing the population against themselves, against each other. Dividing the people in the country because they're afraid of them rising up and attacking the real enemy, which is the massive corruption of the elite. That's what they're afraid of. And the best, it's divide and conquer. I mean, it's like it's a bit sad, that it's come down to such a cliche term, really. That's what they're doing. But then maybe that term exists because it's been true for millennia. Divide and conquer, and that's how you rule.
Yeah.
And it's really coming. It's always been the case to one extent or another, but it's just basically it's been ramped up to a really kind of a high level now. They're really driving the divisions in society. Which is interesting because that's what the West has done in their imperial wars. When they try to when they want to overthrow governments in the Middle East or other countries, they look for the fracture points in society and try to create the appearance of division and then set people against each other. As in those cases, it's to create a civil war type situation into which they can intervene and pacify the country, or and get what they want that way. But they're well trained in foreign countries in the art of sowing social division, and up to and including creating a civil war by having proxy gangs and death squads and all that kind of stuff. And that's not off the table ultimately for European countries as well. At some point down the line, that there would be government death squads. I mean, in fact, on these kind of terror attacks that we saw in Strasbourg, that's a government death squad that carry out those terror attacks. That's a government death squad, the same kind of death squad they used in Iraq and Syria and other countries to inflame tensions in the country. And it could
effectively. I mean, there was a mass protest in Strasbourg outside the European Parliament. Today. The 2 days, it's back on now, but in the 2 days prior to the terrorist attack, then there was an order issued, and I think people respected it. There was no protest the day after. But those very same security forces, some of them at least, were the same guys 24 hours have been cracking heads. And now they're the heroes in the projected narrative of the media. It strikes me that the only result they can produce that is real is the very one that they are trying to avoid happening. Macron has successfully united the population of France in a revolution, which was the title of his book, against him and all he stands for. Yep. And is that not ultimately the end goal of where he's going for all these countries?
It seems to be at this point. Yeah. It seems to be if the elite continue on their current trajectory, and there's no reason to think they'll stop, because people tend to get into a feedback loop where they're afraid of popular uprisings, so they clamp down, but they're also stealing from the public purse massively, and that irritates the people and encourages them to protest and stuff. And when they protest, it scares the government. The government cracks down, then that just pisses the people off even more. And then they protest more, and then the government gets more scared, and then they crack down even harder, blah, blah. It's a pathetic, it's sad how foreseeable the whole thing is, how predictable the whole thing is, in that sense, where it goes. It's been a part of the history of many countries throughout, certainly in modern history, multiple times. And it's well known where it goes and how it happens, and to see it happen again, it's just like, dude, have you not read the History 101, how not to run a country type thing, or how to run a country into the ground? Is that the book you're reading? It's just sad,
Yeah.
But I wanted to jump over to the other side of the Atlantic. There's a video I want to play just talking about the media.
Donald Trump's done. He's done. There's no question about that. He's done.
Breaking news.
A bombshell.
Today is a turning point. Today was historically bad for President Trump.
Today was a turning point.
A turning point.
We're at a turning point here.
The beginning of the end for the Trump presidency.
The beginning of the end.
And breaking news.
We have another bombshell.
Mike Pence might have to assume the office of the presidency.
The call for impeachment.
Rumblings of the word impeachment.
Breaking news.
Another bombshell out of the White House.
I believe this is the beginning of the end.
I do too.
It's really the beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
He may be feeling the walls closing in on him.
All the walls closing in on him.
The walls closing in on him.
Breaking news, a new bombshell.
One astrologer says this means the beginning of the end for President Donald Trump.
The beginning of the end of the Trump presidency.
Trump will resign.
Trump is going to resign.
Is this the tipping point? I know we've said it over and over.
You think this is a tipping point?
And over and over.
This is a tipping point.
And over and over.
Breaking news, President Trump off the rails.
It was the beginning of the end today.
The beginning of the end.
It reminds me a lot of the last days of Nixon.
Breaking news tonight, new bombshell.
This is the beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
The walls are closing in.
The walls closing in.
The walls closing in.
Breaking overnight bombshell.
This is a very dramatic day, and I think it might be near a tipping point. Do you think this is a tipping point?
This is unbelievable. This is remarkable. Have you ever seen anything like this?
His presidency is crippled.
December 1st, 2017, you can mark it down. This is the day that everything changed.
We begin with the bombshell.
The beginning of the end?
The beginning of the end.
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 In fact, if this were a football game, we're in the third quarter. May even be the beginning of the end.
We begin tonight with the bombshell.
Donald Trump is in a lot of trouble.
Trump is in trouble.
The president will resign.
Another hour, another bombshell.
This is a tipping point.
Trump's going down.
This president could be impeached.
I do not think the president will serve out his term.
Resignation.
Resignation. I don't think this president is going to serve out his term. Mr. Trump will not serve out his term. He will not serve out his term. No way. No how.
Breaking news.
Absolute bombshell. I think Donald Trump is in trouble.
Donald Trump is not. He's done. And it's over.
It's over.
The wall's closing in.
The wall's closing in.
This is going to be the Achilles heel.
Breaking news tonight.
I expect Trump to depart.
This week will be the watershed week.
Trump is in big trouble.
Trump's in a lot of trouble.
It's a sign of a terrified old man who feels the
Walls
Closing in.
The walls
Are increasingly
Closing in on him.
Tonight, the walls
are closing in.
today changed everything. This is the beginning
of the end.
Today, the biggest
tipping point for the Trump administration.
What a historic day. The bombshells, they fell.
It's entropy and it's crumbling internally.
He's underwater. He feels
The wall's closing in.
could his testimony be a turning point?
We may be at a tipping point.
It's the beginning of
The end.
The beginning
of the end.
Another bombshell.
bombshell. Bombshell.
Bombshell.
Bombshell.
bombshell.
Bombshell.
Bombshell. This is a bombshell.
It is a bombshell.
I am beginning to resent the word bombshell.
No doubt. All right, that's good.
And they wonder why they're called NPCs.
That was 18 months. That's all you need to know of what happened over the past 18 months, and particularly in the US media. That's pretty much all that happened in terms of what they reported.
NPC said bombshell lots of times.
Walls closing in, beginning of the end, for 18 months. And they had no shame.
Yeah.
There's no shame there. Like, the same people saying the same thing for 18 months. Talk about ideologically or possessed or driven, and complete disregard of any objectivity or any facts. I mean, when you just keep on repeating the same thing over again, and that's the media, they're meant to be informing people. Jesus.
Yeah, the latest now is that Russiagate's going beyond Russia. Mueller's going to start investigating the Trump campaign's links with Saudi and other Middle Eastern billionaires, i.e. he took campaign contributions from rich Arabs in 2015.
Just like every other politician.
Isn't that what you're supposed to do? It's crazy. It's crazy. And it's nothing to do with Russia, of course, but it's like there is no end point. I mean, they'll keep going like this throughout the 4 years.
We can expect
the wall's closing in.
Another 2 years. That
why not? Yeah,
and then in 2 years, someone can add to that video, and they can show, as the dates in the video showed, that from March 2017, for 4 years, almost, they predicted the demise of Donald Trump, while he just kept on being president. And at the end of it, they're going to go, what? That's like Iraq war lies. It pales in comparison to that level of hubris and horse Shiite.
Okay, so they're still attacking Trump, but nevertheless, the US still carries on as before. I mean, for all of the things he's trying to change, I don't see much change in. It's more of the same behavior. The two cases last week were a standout for me. The Russian Maria Butina, who pleads guilty, or it makes a plea deal to being guilty of conspiring against the U.S. government by failing to register as a foreign agent because she's a lobbyist and she happens to like guns and be Russian. It's revolting beyond belief. She's kept in solitary confinement, effectively tortured for over a year now at this point. And then she says, yeah, I'm guilty. Just do something, get me out of here. And then at the same time, last week, this executive of Huawei, big Chinese Apple, basically, a communications firm, she gets arrested in Canada, charged with misleading multinational banks about Iran-linked transactions putting those banks at risk of violating U.S. sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a little crazy, because if you start arresting the executives of your opponent, how are they not entitled to then start arresting Tim Cook and Bill Gates or Warren Buffett? I mean, they could just disappear. You know, you're going to have a pushback in kind.
Mm-hmm.
That's a level of crazy. And this is kind of non-partisan here, where the American elites in general are starting to do things that, you know, it's going to push back on them in serious ways. It's bald-faced blackmail. Trump thought he'd weigh in on it last week, and it didn't help by suggesting that he could help her case if China helped him in the trade deal negotiations.
Yeah.
Exposing right there that it was a political abduction for hostage taking for the purposes of blackmail.
Right. That's how politics and corporate business works.
Oh, but this is brazen, like.
Yeah. It's good though. That's one of the advantages of Trump. You know, he's put a lot of stuff out there. You know, just not necessarily through good intentions, but just by being taking the approach that he's taken. You know, which is his wheeler dealer businessman type. You know, approach to America. America's a business. Let's play hardball type thing, and he's exposed an awful lot of stuff that just by being who he is. Obviously, the whole Russiagate stuff and all that has exposed an awful lot, and exposed also how the media is massively biased towards him. You know, so there's a lot of stuff that he has brought to light through no fault of his own, if you know what I mean, in the sense that he's just being who he is. And for some reason, the deep state, like as we've been saying, really don't like him. The American establishment really don't like him and feel they need to curtail him and corral him and, you know, stop him from doing what he's doing. And obviously the one thing that they don't like about him is that he's a nationalist. You know, he claims to be a nationalist, you know, and that goes back to the whole globalist idea and immigration and all that kind of stuff, that he's singing the wrong song. And I think their main problem with him in that respect is that what he says gives support or succor to other people in particularly in Europe, but in other countries around the world, you know, to stand up and take a stand against, let's say, unfettered immigration, you know. Although, like we said, they have a plan B for that, in the sense that the kind of the deep state actors are happy enough for there to be a rise of the right wing nationalism in European countries and even in America, as long as they can control it. Because the way it's characterized as right wing nationalism, aka Nazis, fascist, and racist, is not actually true for the most part. You know, it's just ordinary people. Probably the majority of people in most European countries don't want unlimited migration. People across, you know, from across the political spectrums, our political spectrum. So, no, I mean, overall,
I think they have a pretty good leash on Trump.
They do, from foreign policy and all that kind of stuff. But
this thing we just saw is keeping up the pressure.
Yeah, but they can't stop him talking. Is the problem?
Yeah,
even if he can do nothing, the problem is they can't stop him tweeting and talking, and that's for them, that's really bad.
U.S. foreign policy is exactly the same. I think when they went after Flynn and Bannon successfully, they were removing an idea of partnering, and this is maybe why Russiagate erupted as it did, as an attack specifically concerning Russia, because they removed an idea to partner with Russia against China.
Mm-hmm.
But now they've reverted to form. No. That was apparently so terrifying a prospect for the globalists who have the United States by the cojones that they had to go. Absolutely, the bottom line. And now, last week, John Bolton announced a new strategy, announced in the Washington Post, The US is telling African countries, you either pick the US or China and Russia, but not both.
Mm-hmm.
Zero sum, you know. You can't do business with both of us like every other, like those countries are saying to anyone. You know, we're not going to make you do whatever we want just to trade with you. America's saying, no, you want to trade with us, you do things our way, American way. So you are our ally and you're with us and you're not with them. Mm-hmm. Of course, this is echoes of George W. Bush. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. Interestingly, in the Washington Post editorial about John Bolton's announcement, the headline was Countering Russia and China in Africa. The subheadline was the US has a new focus, comma, but it can't neglect the terror front. Mm-hmm. Betraying right there that the terror front was always a cover for countering Russia and Chinese access to Asia and Africa. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing new about this. Of course, it's totally business as usual, and it's coming under a Trump government, announced by that walrus Ned Flanders.
Yeah.
Good job.
John Bolton. They could also take it, I mean, another aspect that you're either with us or with the terrorist type thing, you're either with us or against us, is the next stage of that is, what the US has engaged in quite often as well, is if I can't have you, no one can, which is the hallmark of, you know, the pathological partner in a relationship, you know. If you're not with me, then basically I'm going to kill you. You know, and that's something that any African nations that decide to opt for Russia and China would need to keep in mind. They might see themselves under serious a terror alert, if you know what I mean, or under attack by
so Trump could
Boko Haram, let's say, or Al Qaeda in Africa. Al Qaeda wherever we want it to be.
You give me an idea for how Trump could spin this to his base. You see, we believe in traditional values, in monogamy, and there should only be two people in this marriage.
Exactly.
All these unwashed people with their polygamy. Polygamy is evil. So, no, you can't be trading with Russia and China, much less letting them build motorways and infrastructure for you for the first time in the last 500 years of our Western magnificence to the world. Look at the legacy we gave you.
Yeah.
Death, disease, AIDS, a few roads, sure. But the Chinese they're going to colonize you by building all those things for you.
Well, to be fair, I'm not sure.
And then they'll have you.
I'm not sure they give them disease and AIDS.
Well, that would naturally come with widespread poverty and backwardness. You would have a proliferation of cholera and all those things.
Right. Although in Africa, because of the climate, there's a lot more disease there anyway. That's one of the reasons that people overlook when they. I mean, there's obviously lots of reasons, other reasons why African countries are mostly poor. That could be remedied. One thing is you could get Western powers out of there type thing, but one of the reasons obviously is the climate basically, and it's not a very, you know, in terms of growing season and arable land and all that kind of stuff, it's very different from further north, you know, much more productive. Not all the countries, but some of the African countries, but also because of the temperature, there is naturally a lot more kind of disease. What do you call it? The tsetse fly or something like that. There are things that grow in tropical and very warm climates that are not good, you know, and that are a problem for human beings, you know. That's not to say they couldn't be overcome if there was a sufficient level of development, which has been definitely thwarted. But, you know, it's the narrative that it's only Western colonialism that keeps Africa in poverty is a bit too black and white. It's better to say, I suppose, that colonialism has worked there for so long up until the present day because of the various different factors, one of them being that Africa is a difficult place to, you know, it would always be slightly behind more temperate climates on the planet that are more favourable for all of the means of the resources, basically, a lot of the natural resources for food and for, you know, even forests and trees and wood and all that kind of stuff. Like a lot of Africa is quite hot, you know. A lot of African countries are quite hot.
So is a lot of Southeast Asia, including South China.
Yeah, but China's a big country, one big country. You know?
Well, okay, granted. There's still, nevertheless, a fairly black and white difference in concept of how things can be done. China's like specifically going around saying it doesn't have to be zero sum. It doesn't have to be zero
absolutely,
sum.
yeah.
And America's going around specifically saying it has to be zero sum.
Mm-hmm.
You're either with us or we'll blow your country to pieces. That threat's implied. They don't always execute it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is implied in this kind of total message. It's totalitarian.
Right.
As opposed to relatively open. And I say open, like that doesn't mean China is all open borders. It's not. It's very much nationalistic.
Mm-hmm.
So there is still a fundamental qualitative difference in approach,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think ultimately that approach will win out, as far as it goes, as far as they're able to push it, The US is, as we've been saying, and the West is fighting a losing game here, but there's no way to convince them to change their tack, They're set on a trajectory, and it's come hell or high water type thing, They're going to push through it. They can't change. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Although it's not looking good. But then sometimes there's a silver lining in bad things.
This might be our last show for the year, so...
Yes, it probably will be our last show for the year because next week is 23rd, the week after that is the 30th, and we're pretty sure people will be focused on, well, they should be focused on more kind of festive, Christmassy kind of activities, family and friends and all that kind of stuff. So, and the world ain't going anywhere,
the walls will still be closing in according to CNN.
Absolutely, they'll still be closing in on Trump all the way, Unless something major happens, we'll be back in the new year with another show. Until then, we hope you enjoyed this one. If you liked it, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff.
See you next
later.
year. Bye, everyone.